Hey, I guess I'm online. Boy, when you don't schedule a stream, YouTube just sends you online as soon as some bits start coming up to the stream processor. So you get no confirm button. So here we are. 1 second, let me tweet out the link to this. Hey, Michael. Late night stream. Yeah, you know. Didn't do it all week. Guess I was jonesing for it. Actually, didn't touch code for the past 4 days or so. And then just had a little bit of inspiration. Yeah, I think I'll write a little code. I think I'm ready to do it again. And then what I was working on is so kind of well contained. I was just like, you know what? This might be interesting to be a stream kind of separate from all the citizen stuff. So here we are. And peeps be DMing. Good to see you, Michael. Hope your week's been good. Not a lot of folks online in the stream yet, but you know what? I'll go ahead and do an intro anyway and tell people to play back if they want an intro. Basically, I've been spending the past week doing a lot of kind of thinking about what's next for Citizen. I'm not actually going to talk about that, but I am going to contextualize what I'm working on right now. For reasons that you folks may or may not be able to guess, I have some interest in having a really good WYSIWYG for our HTML. And no matter what our direction is, we need to have a good HTML editor. And we have TinyMCE right now, which is not bad by any stretch. It certainly works. Does all the kind of TinyMCE things you would expect. But there are definitely some weirdnesses to it, you might say. Like if I'm working on a page and I start to begin to put in kind of custom elements within it, which we have, and start working on these, the kind of, I don't know, it starts to feel a little bit, you might say, lumpy, a little bit crummy and buggy. And there's a lot about TinyMCE where it's like, okay, for the amount of work I had to put in to get this thing going, it's not bad, right? It's not a bad piece of software, especially for that trade-off of the amount of time I'm putting in versus the results. But it's not perfect. There are a lot of bugs that are starting to kind of show up, and working with it is always feels like wrestling with a cat, or it feels like wrestling with a dog that got chocolate in its mouth. So generally speaking, what I would like to have is a rich editor, or a WYSIWYG, which is actually more akin to something that you get on Wix or Notion, which would be something which is not only very simple to use on desktop, it's also very simple to use on mobile. And this kind of block-oriented approach is really how I would see this working over time, is pressing enter, you got a new line here, now you choose to put some kind of element in there and can start interacting with it. And the elements that are going to be inside of the page are actually rather varied. In some cases, similarly to how, glad to hear that. Similarly to how in Notion you'll have elements like let's say a calendar. That's a good one to put in there. That was a full page calendar, so that's not really what I wanted. Let's try, I believe there is an inline, yeah, like an inline table, right? Now, an inline table is still kind of WYSIWYG-y. There are elements that I'm trying to kind of get at here where it's not even like having a normal WYSIWYG element, but just kind of dropping a UI in there. Maybe a Kanban board inline is a little bit more along the lines of what we're talking about. And that's sort of demonstrated by dint of some of these controls here, right? Like you have a UI element for inserting a post feed in there. And over time, that's going to keep on kind of growing out from there to the extent that we're going to have elements which are about controlling layout, and doing so responsively, which is always interesting. You're going to have elements which actually might represent data logic, is things like to deal with templating. So there's some kind of interesting and complex facets to this. Now, the stuff that has to do with templating, I'm not really sure. We're going to have to think about how that works exactly. There may be a certain kind of work that you just can't do in a WYSIWYG and have to drop down to the HTML. We'll see. At any rate, I've been futzing around with some of the different WYSIWYG tool sets out there, looked at CKEditor in the past, looked at Scribe, looked at Quill, looked at Prose Mirror, and they kind of run the gamut of being like TinyMCE, which is something that you can drop in and easily use, versus being something that's a little more customizable, like CKEditor and Prose Mirror are really more like frameworks for building editors. And they're all, I am quite sure, well designed. There you go, Blaine Cook. Precisely right. That I'm. There's a reason why I titled this "Oh, the Humanity." It's a bad idea. It's a terrible idea what I'm doing, and I just kind of thought, well, screw it. I want to engage in a bad idea, and my belief is that I have a way of approaching this that's properly constrained to the extent that I won't hurt myself. Now, one thing that kind of helps is I don't have any real-time collaborative editing requirements, so that sort of helps in terms of the simplicity of the data model. But another thing is that I'm kind of taking a simplified view of HTML, one which is not going to be 100% sort of conformant to all the possibilities of what HTML can be represented on the page, rather taking a more of a blocks versus inline text approach. A lot of the WYSIWYGs that I saw, their frameworks go along the lines of a block element or similar, a leaf element or similar, and then within the leaf elements you would have annotations or markup that you could put on the text within it. I am thinking that by and large the editor that I'm going to be working on is really just thinking in terms of blocks and leafs, and then the annotations I'm going to be leaning on the dreaded content editable. And so, yeah, there will be, of course, content editable has varying results, but yeah, Blaine, this is one of those things where I'm well aware of how this is a bad idea. The thing that is killing me, though, is that nothing that I'm finding feels particularly great on both desktop and mobile. That's one of those kind of problems that I keep running into. Like, so I'm trying out their demos and going like, okay, so I'm going to have to do some work to even get the kind of baseline out-of-the-box experience feeling good on both. But then they all have relatively sophisticated and complex designs, which are not really how I'd like to structure my editor. So I'm thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to have to really get deep into the internals of how this thing is designed if I'm going to be able to get the base level experience that I want. They all have, I've read through the architectural docs for both CKEditor and for Prose Mirror to pretty well completion. So I understand a lot of what they're doing, a lot of why they're doing the different things they're doing. And so I pretty well appreciate how scary this is, of what I'm getting into. But there is, none of them work exactly the way I want to, and I am looking at the situation and going, really the thing I probably ought to do for the time that I have is just get TinyMCE working well, because I'm time boxed here, so it's the best results I can get for the least amount of effort. But as I'm kind of on my weekend and kind of futzing around, not terribly happy with any of the existing editor frameworks and feeling like I'd have to go deep into each of their internals before I could even get the base level experience I want and then come away with an evaluation of like, okay, that's a winner. It struck me as, well, you know what? Let's find out just how terrible it is to do this from scratch. So that's what's happening. And I'm actually not starting from scratch with the stream here. I'm a couple of... maybe an hour deep into it. And here's where our code is at. I'm using lit elements to do my rendering. We got the demo index.html, so we've got the citizen editor there. That is just getting loaded up, so at this point the instantiation is occurring by dint of it being on the page. And I got some helper functions to kind of take a look at the results that we're getting. Here's our entry point on the editor. Currently, it is pretty simple. It's a web component declared right here that creates block definitions, which is a kind of like a data wrapper class. So our data model, and then renders a toolbar, and then the root block. So it's a tree structure, of course. The data model is defined thusly, where every node either has content or blocks. So it's either a branch node or a leaf node. If it's a branch node, it has child blocks. If it's a leaf node, it has content. And probably anybody such as Blaine that knows what they're doing or has experience with this will probably spend some time screaming at the screen. Blaine, it is up to you whether or not you want to stick around for this kind of personal abuse. If you are going to stick around, I'm always happy to hear feedback, but there is a little bit that I'm going to just need to explore this on my own. So if you're, you know what, I need to zoom in my code. So if you're looking at anything and going like, you're going to regret that, let me learn it. Don't worry about it. This is really just sort of, I felt like doing this for the weekend. So anyway, we've got our data structure, which is a tree structure, pretty common stuff. It has a tag name and then content. The tag names are not one-to-ones to actual HTML tags in all cases, such as the root node, which is an editor node. In the actual rendering, we are the data model gets rendered by these web components that are currently defined here. So we've got the kind of base generic block renderer. We've got the editor block renderer, and then we've got some list block components. And so like this is kind of where I was leaving off, is trying to get like unordered and ordered lists into place and starting to work on their behaviors. And currently, as you can see, a lot of the ways that these subclassed or these kind of individual renderings work is by just subclassing and tweaking some of the attribute to kind of like parameterize general behavior. And then you have the root class, where a lot of the logic of the editor currently is. So here is the heart of how this is all behaving. You got every block has a if it is able to change what kind of block it is, it has a wrapper with a control for modifying it, and we'll see that in a second. Renders its content. If it contains blocks, it renders the tree children. If it doesn't contain blocks, if it's a leaf node, it renders its buffer. And the buffer is a div with content editable and some listeners on the events and a rendering of the content, which I am constantly listening to the changes of and grabbing. And then, whenever you press arrow up, arrow down, and enter, I'm modifying the tree structure of the blocks. So here's what it looks like currently. We got a good old-fashioned paragraph tag here, and here's another block, and here's another. The UI looks terrible because I'm just working my way through here, but here I'm changing the block types between the different currently supported ones. And where I was leaving off was with the bulleted list, where things get a little more complex. And so this is the first case I have here of having sub blocks within the tree. And it's set up so that the UL is a block type, which we could change away from, and I need to actually fix up the converter because it's a little screwy. And there's no Control Z, of course. No Control Z. That's something to think about. Oh, God. Right. See, that's what the great, what diving in gets you. At some point, you press Control Z, and then you think, oh, well, fuck me. If I want to have an undo history, then I need to have a stack of some kind. And then you start thinking, okay, well, that's why they represent everything as deltas. I'll tell you what, at the end of this, I'm either going to have something I can work with, or I'm going to really appreciate why everything else is designed the way it is. Anyway, hey, you know what? Worst case, it's a fun exploration to to witness. Yeah. So. So, the place I was futzing around with last was the list of the UL elements. So perhaps that's a good place to leave off. Now I'm kind of stopping and thinking like, okay, how seriously do I want to take the undo history right now? Do I want to start to do I want to start to try to address the stack of changes, address the way that the data is created? It was a pretty interesting model that Quill uses of their deltas model, which is a pretty fun and interesting algorithm there. May end up just lifting one of those algorithms, because a lot of these things end up working really pretty much the same. They're all tree structures that then handle things like the actual HTML, like bold, the kind of rich text elements. They handle all of them as kind of annotations, not within a tree structure. So I could try lifting one of those data models out along with the undo stack that comes along with it. Another way you could do the undo stack is, it's currently looking like I'm doing something similar to what ProseMirror does, which is having a sort of a frozen data model. The tree structure, anytime you modify something, you actually create a new node, which means that you're actually able to preserve previous trees in memory. So we could do an unwind stack where you just keep on rebasing you hold on to the previous root nodes and then rebase your way backwards and forwards to the undo history. That might be an interesting design as well. Got to think about the memory of that, but not impossible. Okay. Well, I'm going to just keep on working through the interactions that I've been working on and see how it goes. So we're working on unordered and ordered lists, and there are a couple of different things that need to work. One of them is you click this button and convert back to text or something like that. I appreciate it, Blaine. If you want to hit me with any of your predictions, fair enough. If you do want to hit me with any predictions about what's going to end up totally wrecking this whole premise or jamming me up the hardest, feel free to dump those in there. So right. So let's tackle this converting from a UL into text, which looks like the data structure is not converting correctly. It should be converting. Let's take a look. So when I run that conversion, let's see. So we do on set block tag, and that's getting called. Should always be getting handled by the parent of it. So let's check on that idea. This dot definition and console.log e.target. So basically, whenever a conversion occurs, the parent node that contains that item, the event bubbles up to that parent node. And so we just need to check in to see what's going on with the UL. Let's see why that conversion doesn't seem to be bubbling up to the right parent. In that case, that's correct. I'm going to now do a bulleted list. Again, that's correct. And now when I convert back to text, okay, so it looks like in that case the UL is the one capturing that, which is interesting, actually. I guess that makes sense because it's listening on its own. So, It's interesting you feel that mobile is in particular the hard aspect of that because in my experience, the interaction model of mobile would benefit most from, or at least the UX of a block-based editor would be preferable. So it always needs to be, I guess the way to handle this is to up target this. There we go. So now I need to add a little more wisdom to that converter there to take a list like that and have it go in the right direction. So I'm going to go to in our block definition, we have this convert logic. In theory, yeah, but it gets complicated, lots of trade-offs. Oh, links get filtered out in the chat, sadly. So if you want to DM that to me on Twitter, I'd be happy to share it on the chat. Yeah, I know it. Alright, so we're going to take it back to text. Works. Take it back to a bullet list. Almost great. Let's see. So, So the BRs that we split on. Interesting. I also would like to remove that. Okay, not bad. Still not getting rid of that. There we go. Okay. So here is the link that was shared by Blaine. I'll tell you one thing I got on you is using lit elements instead of having to. I'm not familiar with the event components. Mix in events. Huh. Looks like a kind of a clever thing that y'all are coming up with. Not to harsh on anything like that, but it's very nice to have lit elements while working on this kind of thing. Interesting. Okay, let's see if I can get numbered lists working. So we need to get some styles going, and I think the trick that we'll have with the numbered lists, not you. The trick we'll have with the numbered lists is getting the numbers to increment the way that we want them to. I can never remember what the decimal. I would put pretty good money on it just being the number 1 over and over. Or just failing abysmally what happened. I appreciate it, Blaine. Yeah, I would expect any responsible person to tell me to stop what you're doing. It's like when you see somebody swinging around a knife. Even if you know they're good at it, you gotta, you're like, oh, I don't know if you're being safe with that knife. Maybe you should put that away. Okay, let's take a look at the JSON representation here. For some reason, the data structure is empty. So actually okay, it's a conversion thing, I'm guessing. Yeah. So we're going from something that's not a list to a list. This should be getting triggered. Oh, there it is. Okay, yep. Wrong. I'm not going to worry about that right now. At some point I'll have to figure out how to get that correct. So far so good though. Let's get in. Hey, this stupid asshole swinging a knife around. Get the popcorn. Okay. So let's add in a couple more base level interactions. Let's handle the backspace or delete on an empty buffer. When that happens, that should delete the block, unless it is the interesting. Yeah, we'll have to come up with some kind of logic around, is this the last leaf in the tree, and can we delete the entire tree? So the codes that we're going to want to listen to are backspace and delete. Simple enough. And then we'll do if this.definition.content. All right, catch you later. So now, there it is. And we're going to do a redispatch delete block. Has to be handled by the parent, so we always let that bubble up. And then we stop the propagation. We're going to grab the index of the block. We're going to splice definition.blocks.splice at the index, removing one element. If that is the last child, I think the way we handle this actually is by just emitting another delete block. From the one that handled it. And if there is a parent listening out there, it'll delete it, and if not, it won't, which is good because that means our editor won't delete itself, our root block won't delete itself. So let's test this out. Critical failure, all right. Let's first see if we got it. Oh, you know what we need to do is need to manually request an update because we're mutating. There it goes, okay. So after that, we need to focus the adjacent element, the nearest adjacent element, which should reliably be something like this. Interesting. So it appears to actually be deleting, but the rendered state is wrong. So somehow, even though we're successfully deleting the item, the updated rendering on the page is not correct. So our data model is correct, our data structure is correct, but the actual rendering is not. That seems to be on account of request update not doing what it should. Oh, did I not? I didn't get that request update in there. Remember what I said, I'm not mutating the state and could do a rebase sort of thing. That is not wholly true at the moment. It's not a function. Not wholly true because I'm doing splices, but not hard to imagine how that could be done. Okay. Now, this may actually not be the right logic now that I'm thinking about it. Rather than doing a delete block, we may want to actually instead replace this with a join, kind of like a join upward call. Let me think. You never know. It's a very specific approach that I'm taking, doing it with this explicitly block-based approach. And why don't I, to help sort of demonstrate the underlying data model, I'm going to add a border. So that it is very explicit how this data model is working. So now those squares will pretty tightly, ooh, interesting, pretty tightly mirror the data structure here. Yeah, I mean, so again, like, there's the content editable that I'm really going to be using this in a pretty sort of doing something similar that a lot of the editors do, which is not just dumping the HTML into a div and then saying turning on content editable. Instead, I'm reifying the structure of the HTML into a custom data model, and the only place that I'm really leveraging the content editable behavior is in the buffers of the leaves of the tree. And so hopefully, generally I get the impression that not only is that how most of the models work for the kind of mainstream editors, the other thing that they'll do is as the content editable changes, so as like these leaf node buffers change, they'll actually reify that into a separate data structure as well. So I'm keeping it as HTML for those leaf structures, so like it's whenever I store the actual results, I'm keeping this, and you bold tag can't see. What a lot of the other editors will do is actually take that and parse that into some other data structure, like a list of text, and then like separate the blocks out and indicate that there's an annotation on the word can saying that it's bold, because they just kind of don't trust the it keeps it in their control. But then whenever they what they'll do is they'll allow the browser to continue to manage commands from the environment, which is what content editable is quite good at doing, and then they'll kind of like take the results and reify them back into their custom data structure, and then possibly even re-render again afterwards. So it's a very weird loop when you think about it of what's being done. But I think we can get away with just sticking with straight up HTML here instead of reifying into that list-based structure, because we don't have like hugely. We'll see. We'll see how rough that is to deal with. Probably pasting will end up being a complex thing. Who knows? Yeah, I mean, copy and paste in general. Like, one thing, of course, that's totally foobar here is like I can't select a large, So selecting the content and doing a copy out of this is already, we can see, screwed up with this design as well. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's a really interesting question about like how much of a concern that is, because like we're getting away from stuff that you cleanly can copy and paste. I suppose it's possible to take something like all this and try to do a select all on it, and see they kind of they've done something interesting here. They've created a custom selection that works in 2 dimensions. I'm fascinated to see what happens if I copy and paste this into a text editor. Yeah, and then they have a kind of a reification of the different form. And then I'm curious what happens if I now paste into a new page. The copies relatively directly. Interesting. But notably, they're implementing a custom selection, which probably is important. But see, again, this is why I'm willing to even go down this route, is that this right here is much closer to where we're headed here. We're really more in a UI builder akin to Notion or Wix, not akin to TinyMCE. It's really not a rich editor. It's a WYSIWYG for UIs. So that's kind of why I'm inclined to say we should be going down a sort of a custom route here. You mean a page? Yeah, the Notion copy and paste Babel is actually pretty clean. And yeah, Michael, probably, I mean, almost certainly the way that, like, first of all, if we're going to do a copy and paste that's similar to that, I would do the exact same thing. I would do that 2-dimensional custom select. And then second of all, for a situation like that, there's always also going to be the ability to drop into HTML editing. And so then you can copy and paste the actual markup. So what I was just working on is this whole, deleting a node when it's empty and you press delete. Probably we don't actually want to just do delete whenever it's empty and you press backspace. We probably want to do, if you press backspace at the root of it or delete at the end of it, a join in one direction or the other. So joining nodes is an interesting thing to do. Could make it sort of conditional as to whether or not it's allowed. Like some nodes can join with other nodes. That would make life a little easier for us. For instance, if I'm in, that's not quite working. If I'm in this node and I do a delete right here, I can imagine the first LI popping up, but it might be easier just not to have it do that. But let's go ahead and get some form of the join behavior. So, right, so we're going to need two helper functions, is cursor at start and is cursor at end. Alright, so now we get to deal with cursor ranges a little bit, which is always a little bit of a treat. So we're going to probably want to use get selection, and let's just go ahead and log that to see what it looks like. So so a collapsed range means that it's doesn't have a spread on it, whereas like if in that case right there it's not going to be collapsed because I was selecting more than one thing. So you're going to want to ignore this if it's not collapsed. It's easy to know if it's at the beginning. Knowing if it's at the end is a little more complex. If it's at the beginning, the offset will be 0. I believe. There's maybe some interesting complications around this regarding sub-elements and things like that, but okay. And let's see. Well, you got how to move it to the end. Maybe the way to do this is actually just to generate this sort of thing right here. We create the range, and then we just compare the range. Let's try that. Okay, so interesting. Having done that, the range that's created has a different offset. That's interesting. Even more interesting is that offset didn't change as I removed items from the content editable. Interesting, 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 interesting. Could try, here's an interesting question. If I bold and then do this, does that affect the selection that we see? So it's 5 right now. I bold a letter. Now it's 3. Interesting. So that means that it's actually, I think, responding to the current node that it's in. So if I do that, I bet it's going to go down to like 1. Nailed it. If I do it like this, it'll go to 2. No, it didn't. Now that's interesting. What's the actual HTML that we're looking at? Ah, they're different text nodes. Ah, fun. Okay. I wonder if there's a way to get selection relative to a parent. Yeah, so we're really getting into the fun stuff here. So this is a piece of code that somebody's created that takes a input node and basically gets a caret position that relates to the text content offsets indexes, which is sort of what we're looking for here. And it gives us a nice insight into what the kind of ranges and selection and cursor behaviors of HTML and content editable is like, which is kind of a fucking nightmare. The reason it's a nightmare like this is that it's a tree structure that cursor is relative to. And so as we're seeing here, you can't just kind of like tell me what's, say, hey, what's the current current selection and expect it to give us just an offset within this buffer in the text content sense. It's giving us an offset within the tree structure that this represents, which is a much more complicated thing. Now, it might behoove us to just actually grab this code or something like it. It's a little bit ugly. This person is not using standard JavaScript style. Could take this algorithm and hold on to it. It might be useful. Certainly, it would help us for the current thing that we have to do, which is figure out if the cursor's at the end, where we would just use this algorithm and then compare the text content length to this. Certainly one way to do it. I'm wondering if the selection information couldn't be something in that API might perhaps. Is it get selection or get current? Let's get selection. All right, so maybe the selection object actually can tell us something useful here, such as whether or not it is at the end. It's not looking like it. Let's read this class real quick. Anchor of the selection is the beginning point. The editing host, is the editable element. The focus of a selection is the endpoint of the selection. That's good to know. And the range is a contiguous part of a document. I wonder if I can So a selection is actually a combination of ranges, which I find really interesting. Interesting. Okay, kitty cat wants in, so 1 second. So I'm wondering if I can use this generated range, which I know will put us at the end of the buffer, and compare it to the ranges within the selection. Kitty catty. Now let's see here. At the top we got the range that's being given to us by the selection. And at the bottom we got the one that's given to us by the... So that's actually not super helpful, unfortunately. It's selecting the text node. Huh. What does it look like if I do this? Yeah. So this is not feeling more helpful. Meow meow. Yeah. Hi, Berlin. Is it morning over there? There's a utility library for dealing with this stuff. Kitty catty. So I have a way of possibly handling this, but I'm kind of... How did this person do this? Get the selection. I'll modify on it. Is that an API? Non-standard. Just Internet Explorer didn't support it. You can move it. Huh. It's an interesting API. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. I know. You're a little fuss. What collapsed it and does. Okay, so that actually just modifies. Don't really want to change the selection. This is good to know. The multiple ranges thing, don't really need to worry about that. Generally speaking, there's only one range. Suppose another way we could do this is by just noting whether or not could just let the delete happen and then see if the length changes, but that's really clumsy. Okay, we're given a range. Could try, let's see, could try increasing the size of the range, seeing what happens. Let's try that. Boundary points, and then we'll do range dot end to end, and compare that to range 2. It's coming back -1 every time. Try first of these, which I assume would cause it to just give us 1 every time. Okay, how do I solve this? Get selection doesn't take any parameters. here's somebody asking this question, and nobody has an answer. Okay, this person seems to think has something that's pretty similar. We were pretty close on it. So, create a second range. We set the start to the initial ranges in container and end offset. And then we just clone the contents and see what the length is. Right, it didn't work at all like I was hoping. They get the range, create another range, select the node contents, they set the range 2, set start, end container, end offset, clone the contents. Check the text content length. So that seems to actually be working, except it's not. Let's try trimming. That explains it. Okay, that works. Yeesh. I'm not sure actually that this is consistently correct. We should probably use the same technique there. So that they do that with the start container and start offset. Create a new range, and we're at the start of the length. Start container and start offset. We need to set in, not set start. Sort of makes sense. Okay. Brutally complex just to get something as simple as that. Alright, so now we know if backspace is pressed at the beginning or delete is pressed at the end. And we'll fire these join block up and join block down commands, or events, you might say. Now we need to handle those. Actually, instead of making them separate, I'll just do join block and then pass a direction. This will do a delete it first. Okay. Okay, and now we just need to actually join the content of those things. not working at all. Destination block, dropped block. Seems right, so I think probably something is amiss on actually rendering the change. Yeah. Okay, I think maybe to solve that, I actually have to replace the target block as well with a totally new block that has the merged together information. So we'll do const content equals direction is up, then we want the destination block followed by the source block, and then we reverse it in the other case. And then we're going to do this .definition.blocks equals, let's just splice it like so. Let's splice at the should do it. Ooh, that fell the fuck apart. Well, it technically worked. Just something is going really wrong with the rendering afterwards. Alright, let's see what's attempting to be rendered here. Let's call on that, so it's doing a render subblock, so then we get into the render, eventually we're getting into the render buffer, so let's this.definition.content Somehow that's getting undefined. It's pretty odd because the content is correct. Somehow it's getting lost. Try doing it like this. Oh my gosh. That fixed it. Cool. Let's try with our UL now. UL goes totally foobar if there's no content when I create it. Okay, looking good. So that'll teach me a lesson about splicing instead of... Probably remove that splice as well, seeing as it just does not seem to want to work this way. So we're going to do that. Just not going to do any mutations. Okay. Works for me, and it's definitely... Oh, gotta do it here too. It's definitely going to be a better approach in the long run. Next up, we need to get it so that selection up or down can work to get outside of the current tree. So that'll be on select next block. We will just not stop the propagation unless want the select up or down to just pop up to the parent tree whenever there's, let's see here, whenever you're at the end. Yeah, the multi-threader stuff is going to be great. Very excited about that. Interesting, right. Okay. So, if the target... You just need to re-emit it, I think, is what needs to happen. Yeah. So we have to set ourselves as the one firing it. There we go. Okay. Okay, that's interesting. So it's working except that focus is jumping right up to the top of the list as opposed to the end. need that to be a little smarter and go to the last one. We also totally lose cursor position as we change blocks. Should be trying to preserve that in some way. So that's one problem we know we have. Another problem is when you hit enter, it should be truncating whatever text is in the current buffer and moving that down, splitting it out in that regard. And then another problem we got is that if I switch to a bulleted list and there's no content, it goes kind of screwy. For some reason, I'm not getting an LI, and I think I know why that is actually now that I think of it. If I go to our conversion code, items dot length 0. Just need to add a empty one. There we go. Also should have selected buffer. Let's fix that up real quick. So when you handle a conversion, good. I think the next one I'm going to handle though is when you hit enter on an empty one inside of the UL, rather than creating another list item, need it to remove the empty one and create a new block. Spending a lot of time just getting the list item in a working state because it's our only, it's kind of the first item we got that has it's a block that contains blocks. Hopefully a lot of the stuff we're doing here will generalize. If not, it'll be a proper pain. So a pin new block gets called whenever you do press enter, so you do an append new block. I think what we want to do is override this whenever it is the UL or the OL. And basically what we're going to do is just take a look at the currently focused child block and see if it's the last one and empty. And if it is, then we're going to change the handling, and if not, we're going to let the normal handling go. So if is last child and is empty, okay. So the first thing we need to know is, do we have a way of getting the currently focused child? It doesn't look like we do. So let's start by tracking that. That's not good. appears to be. Next up, we need to get the data, matching data block for it. That's its definition. So we do const, I guess we have an index of it. Yeah, we do. So focused block index equals focused block dot data set dot index, and then if index equals this dot definition dot blocks length minus 1 and focused data block dot definition dot content dot trim dot length equals 0. There it goes. So when that happens, we're going to modify this to we're going to do a delete, and then we're going to dispatch another append. Okay, interesting. Okay, interesting. Alright, we got a problem. Our query selector all is not getting only children. Okay, I think we can do that. Alright. Okay, good. So we're going to need to use that a couple places. Why don't we actually... All right. Interesting. Something's going wrong in a number of ways. That's right. So the index should be 0, and it is. We create a new block. Currently splicing it in, which is fine. That's coming out nada. That's interesting. Why might subblocks be coming out with nothing? You got block content, and you got the is block. Scope, block content, is block. This would be good on the top level. Oh. That's the problem. Aha. I see. The definition varies depending on how we are rendering. Yeah. In that case, we need to add a block wrapper. There we go. Alright, one last task, and that is to get the empty element to delete, though we could just, it would be nice if it went away. That should be pretty straightforward. We just take our definition.blocks, and we do a slice, dropping the last one, and that should do it. There we go. Looking good. Let's add the same behavior to the numeric list, which will be easy, just to copy and paste. Good deal. Next up, let's hit the cursor positioning as you're moving up and down. Oh man, there's lots of lots of interactions to work through. Step back for half a second. We have all of the kind of simple block elements handled. And we got our numbered lists. We're going to need to add a separator element. And then what more? Well, let's see. That was interesting. Oh. Need to set it up so you can't delete all the nodes. Probably won't get into doing a table today. Why don't we wrap up all of the bulleted list behavior, barring indentation. Indentation will have to be future pain in the butt. And then we will get the toolbar going and introduce those kinds of controls, so like bolding, italics, links, things like that. So the way this will all pan out is that you have all the block level elements will be through this kind of menu. So you want to add a new block level element, you create a new block, and then you change it there. And then as you're editing within text, you select it, and then you press the button up in the toolbar. And so the toolbar, that'll be things like having the bold, italic, things like that, and it's going to need to like change its pressed or depressed state based on the current selection, which will suck, I am sure. And then you get into stuff like having controls for like choosing where a link goes and things like that. And once you've got all that, I have this to-do list of all the elements that I need to support, all the interactions I need to support. So you got all the kind of the basics of HTML up here, and then we have to like hit all of the custom citizen element stuff. So that's where it starts to get interesting, to be sure. This stuff actually ought to be relatively simple, all told, because a lot of these are more or less opaque elements. They're a block that like don't actually support rich text within them. So that should be pretty simple to do for a lot of those, and it's just a matter of kind of getting in the controls for them. The most difficult one, ostensibly, would be like the card element, but that one's actually not that hard. The card element is actually just sort of a variation of the normal block ones, just with different rendering. So that's pretty easy too. Somebody's trying to tell me that rich text editors in HTML is hard. I don't know what they're talking about. Got this locked up. All right. Let's improve the cursor selection behaviors. And to make life a little easier, I'm going to change our initial definition here. You know, what else we're going to have to get into is converting to and from HTML from our custom structure. That'll be a treat. All right, so basically we have a general piece of code for selecting next and previous blocks, and the cursor movement, it works, but it's not 100% how it ought to be working. So I don't know how easy it is to see. Why don't I, to make it a little easier to see, I'm going to take the buffer focus state and give it a yellow background. So for somebody coming back in, such as yourself, I'll explain what I'm about to do, if you're curious, which is as you're scrolling up and down between the blocks, as you can see, it kind of moves nicely when you're going downwards, but when you're going upwards, it jumps up to the top of the list. So I need the kind of the select previous or next block to be a little more intelligent about handling the tree structure. And then on top of that, the actual cursor position needs to try to maintain that. So if you're starting out at 3 characters in, it should try to stay 3 characters in as you move up and down to make it feel a little more fluid. So this shouldn't be terribly difficult. What we're going to do is we're going to change this function to focus block as opposed to just focus, because focus is actually a, or we'll call it focus buffer, because focus is actually an API in on the DOM, and so overriding it would be unwise, I think. And then on focus buffer, we're going to add a direction. Now this dot buffer, interesting stuff. This dot buffer is a bit of where this gets complicated. So we actually want to have this behavior vary depending on whether or not you have subblocks. If this duck contains okay, that's pretty straightforward, I think. So now the focus buffer command just needs to say if you're going up or down. And just like that, easy peasy. Well, that merge didn't really work the way it should have. And now pressing enter isn't doing what it's supposed to. Huh. That worked. That's still wrong. That's not right at all. So, what just happened to the thing that I just implemented? On a pen block. That's coming out undefined. A little bit of a bug. There we go. That merge isn't quite working right. We'll come back to that in a second. So now that's scrolling correctly through the tree structure, but we're losing the cursor position, so we need to fix that. Let's fix up that join behavior real quick. So when we're doing a join block, let's take a look at what the results should be. I guess what's happening is that so the join block needs to be intelligent about merging or not merging branches and leaves. Makes it a little more complicated. gonna leave that as a to-do. So for now, what's actually happening if I do a to.json is that our UL element is probably picking up that content. It is. Which is effectively meaningless because the UL can't have content. No big deal, just need to get around to that. So let's see about maintaining the cursor position. Well, this is going to suck in the same way that all this sucked. Cursors are a bit of a bastard. Let's see if our helper function seems to work. Alright, so that seems to be working. Anish. Good to see you. working on, for reasons nobody can really understand, a WYSIWYG from scratch for Citizen. Here's where we're at. Still in the early phases of creating a structured block-based tree for all the kind of HTML block level elements, and then we're going to get into the actual rich text in a bit. So we're having a good time. Yeah, pretty much everybody right away was like, yeah, you don't want to do that. I see, it's recursive function. It's true. I guess I have a little bit of a habit of this, don't I? range seems right that we're getting here. I'm not totally sure why it doesn't seem to be working. Does seem to be possibly going to the wrong text node. Starting range, starting the node. Okay, and that's not 0 yet. Is 0, what do we see? Yeah. It's not, so then interesting. Okay, I think I kind of know what's happening. We've got these text nodes that are just not useful information, you know, that not visible information. It's this, you know, all of this in there. Comment block and the. I wonder if I could fix this problem if I rendered my buffer differently. Rendered it like that. Lo and behold. Yeah, that fixed it. We still have a problem of what happens when it's an overflow. So I'm going to deal with that. struggling to find the end condition here. Okay. So if we hit the overflow, then we want to set the end to basically, we need to figure out how to set the end. Could we do this? Looks like we can. Okay, seems to be behaving the right way. Okay, that's good. Now that behavior is more or less what I would expect, so that's good. Close to it anyway. That's an interesting edge case there. What happens if I just set this to like... that seems to work a little better. Okay. One other interaction we need is when you do a join up, it needs to put the cursor at the right place in both cases. When you do a split in the middle, it needs to handle that correctly. So those are two things to handle. So first we're going to handle a join up, maintaining the cursor position where it should. Then a join down, same story. And then an append should split the current. So that should all be some exciting shit. Alright, so join up. Let's start with that. It actually should be pretty straightforward because we'll take the destination block's content length and that should give us the right answer. Look at that. So that's good. Good and consistent. Let's actually get rid of that space being introduced so it's a little more true to whatever is happening here. So that feels a little better. And that should actually have fixed join downs as well. Yep. Ooh. That's interesting. So it's not exactly right. Seems to be right when we do a join down, or rather a join up. When we do a join down, it seems wrong. It seems to be dependent on the direction. So let us apply that same logic. Okay, that fixes that. And now when we do an append new block, it's actually not an append in all cases. It's actually a split. Similar to how deleting an empty block is a delete. If you press enter in the middle of a content-full block, it's not an append, it's actually a split. So let us now if this dot definition content and not this dot is cursor at end. Need to add split block. splitting a buffer's content is actually kind of hard. Come to think of it. Alright, let's see. We're gonna need another utility function probably. Even though the cursor stuff that I'm dealing with from the browser APIs is kind of difficult, I can understand why it works the way it does. And can appreciate it. I think it's poorly built by any stretch. Okay, so that didn't really work. actually, it did work. It's just that the inner HTML isn't giving me what I want. This API is actually serving us quite well, given the situation. Yeah, I think I have to put the document fragment into a div. Kitty catty. Yeah. Okay, no biggie. Interesting. It's not quite right. That is. And kitty cat. Kit may be about ready to start a revolution if I don't pay her attention. Okay, that didn't work. It was working fine just a second ago, so what happened? Ah. Okay. So that's working and it's preserving the HTML and everything. So we're looking good. It's all starting to sort of work the way I would expect it to. Perfect. So that's all good. That's what we were setting out to accomplish for all of our nodes. There was something just bothering me I wanted to get around to fixing, but that just takes us to our toolbar now. And then, yeah, so it would be a good time to map out to-dos. Alright, that seems like a pretty healthy to-do list, so gotta implement the toolbar, have the buttons apply and remove inline formatting, set the button states for the current cursor, so they pressed or depressed or disabled depending on what you're looking at. Need to get all the kind of pop-up and hover UIs for configuring elements. You gotta serialization 2/parsing from HTML. Gotta handle a copy and paste. Probably need to think about how to do an undo and redo stack. I think I can pull that off. Then you got like indenting and outdenting for lists. UI aesthetics, and then all the different block types, inline formatting types, and citizen block types. So it's been an interesting, I'm going to wrap it up here, but it's been an interesting start with all this. Certainly, I guess actually another behavior would be selecting multiple blocks. Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting sort of learning opportunity about, you know, some of the challenges of doing a WYSIWYG like this. Off the top of my head, what sort of stands out to me is the degree to which most of what I've been futzing with so far has not really had to do with content editable so much as it's been about handling the blocks representation of the document, of the HTML document that I'm working on, and futzing with like interactions between merging or splitting the trees, or kind of, you know, rendering the tree structure, things like that, and like fighting against cursor positioning, which is an inherently complex thing with a rich text format like HTML is. So far, most of the work being done has really not been about fighting against like content editable yet, which, you know, could just be a great indicator that we haven't run into the real pain so far, because it's all been more or less straightforward. But, you know, we'll see. It certainly helps that I've had some experience futzing with the other, like reading and poking at the code of some of the other more rigorous editors, so I know sort of, you know, kind of get a sense of how they were doing things, and was able to pull from that, so that helped. So yeah, I'll be interested to see kind of how this evolves over time in terms of difficulty to execute on this. You know, there it is. Kind of looks like a real thing. You can see where it's going. Yeah. I hope this turns out, because I would actually really like to have something that I can work so directly with. Those two features are really key. Feature number one, made by me. Feature number two, not made by somebody other than me. Those are some really great selling points for me right now. It would be actually really quite funny if, like, no surprises show up. It ends up being one of those straightforward things where, for some reason, because of like my requirements or the state of current browsers or something like that, it ends up I'm the first person never to have any problems. Yeah, something's got to be waiting in the weeds for me, because this is one of those things everybody freaks out the minute you think about it or suggest it. So there's got to be something more complex than I've run into yet. But so far, I'm not really sure I could get the experience I want if I didn't have this thing custom made. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like, it seems like the inline blocks and like the really crummy features of HTML are where things get hard. And the biggest cost of not supporting that means that, like, if somebody dumps in HTML, we just won't be able to handle all of it. But, you know, yeah, I'm fine with that. The cursors, yeah, I'm curious how much pain we still have left on the cursor front, because I'm starting to get my feet under me on that. And then the undo history, that depends. I may have to kind of abstract out the document state into a kind of a manager. And this is again where I would benefit from seeing, have the benefit of seeing how other people have done it. The main thing is that, like, since I'm not trying to support collaborative editing, like a lot of the other editors are designed to do, the data model gets a little bit simpler. And so I'll probably do, I think it was ProseMirror that did it this way. Yeah, where it's a tree structure that's just, you're not allowed to mutate it. And then you just, whenever you're modifying the tree, you clone the tree and then kind of change the, you clone the tree and then only modify the branches that have changed so that you can store in history a relatively cheap reification of the history. The kind of thing where, like, if I change this node right here, then you get a new history entry, but because it's immutable, the data structure, only like 2-3 nodes change and the rest are shared between the history. So you're able to kind of like basically have a history that only maintains diffs within the memory. You have a lot of kind of shared objects in your history stack. So that can make it relatively cheap and straightforward to do. So then you wrap that inside of a management object kind of thing where you kind of like do a transactional apply, and it kind of bundles together or helps you reconstruct the tree, things like that. So that helps simplify it. The other thing that helps simplify it comparatively is that this is not a plugin-oriented design, which most of the editors and editor frameworks are plugin-oriented, which I can appreciate, but generally speaking, a plugin-oriented architecture is always going to be more complex than an architecture that's you're building from the top down. And that's part of why I kind of tended to dislike the other editors as I was looking at them as like frameworks and things to work with is, I mean, sort of by necessity, if they're a framework for building editors, they have to be plugin oriented, because that's how you're going to be adding features. And pretty consistently, it was, the thing about building within plugins is that the understanding the mechanics of how something is working is really damn hard. It's a really difficult process because you got to hook into various events or flows of the architecture. You really kind of have to understand the underlying architecture really completely in order to build those plugins. And that's one of the main benefits we have here. Not for collaborative editing, and not a plugin architecture. Yeah, the cross-block selection I think is actually probably not that bad either, because again, you just do if you do what Notion did and have this kind of custom two-dimensional selection thing happening, like this right here, that actually is pretty easy, or certainly gets easier, because what you're then doing is selecting at the block level as opposed to the content level. So you can see their way of rendering the selection state, I think, is a little bit wonky, but I can kind of understand why they did it that way. But you're actually selecting blocks as opposed to selecting text. So there's an inline select and a block select, and like we're doing now, you leave the inline selecting to the browser and you do the block select in your own stuff, and then you just need to maintain a list of selected blocks. Makes it pretty straightforward. And then it's just a question of like, okay, can I hook into the Control-C, the copy action, to correctly dump that serialized set of nodes into the copy buffer, and we'll see about that. If not, you could also convert, I don't know, that'll be interesting. We have to see, can we... So it looks like we actually can override the copy. Yeah, and modify what's getting copied. So that's pretty good shit. we can do that, then I think we're pretty much all set. Get a little more complex. Certainly you'll have some moments where you're like trying to select up and being like, what the hell, and then you gotta like go somewhere else and get it to. But it is a pretty custom use case. It's not just a custom, piece of software. It's a custom design goal. Like I wouldn't expect to be using Squarespace or Wix and like select the document and copy and paste it somewhere. All right. Well, have a good rest of your weekend, everybody. Don't forget tomorrow's Mother's Day, so if you got a mother, at least send him a call. Her a call. I don't know if I'll do this tomorrow because I'm going to be doing Mother's Day stuff, so we'll see. We'll probably get back to streaming regularly this coming week, so it'll be good. We'll talk more about, this was all about just working on this thing, but we'll probably start on Monday with a standard citizen stream. So have a good Saturday, everybody. I'll catch you later.